Hello, welcome to the video. Wanted to make sure that the audio is on. That'd be a bad mistake. The satisfaction that we derive from the work that we do, I think, is very, very, very important. And it's oftentimes the difference between being happy to get up in the morning and dreading getting up in the morning. And I think a lot of us find ourselves in a position where we do dread getting up in the morning because we don't like the work that we're doing. And if you're going to come over and teach in Japan all the way across the world, across the sea, this is an even more important question because you've come so far to do this. If it isn't something that you derive satisfaction from, then, well, you got a lot of reworking to do before you can even reset to do whatever is next on your list of goals that you might have. I thought about a bunch of different names for this video to give you some sense of like what's running through my head. One was like, do people appreciate you as a teacher here? What do Japanese people think of English teachers? This kind of thing. So it's all this kind of grouping of ideas about where is your place in the culture in this role? Is it worth it? How much satisfaction, as I say, will you get from it? And what I think is really, really important to understanding it is understanding things on an immediate, personal, one-on-one basis versus the satisfaction that we get from seeing ourselves fit into a much greater picture, something much, much larger. And I would say things are almost always most satisfying if you make the effort to consider them on a personal one-to-one basis. That's kind of the essence of this video, actually, is to work on this kind of perspective. And I say that that's really important because it takes very few steps above us in a social hierarchy, in a working hierarchy, to become a number. And it's easy then to become embittered considering ourselves on that scale, because no one wants to be thought of as a number in any way. I don't, you probably don't. But the mistake is to think that further on up that ladder, wherever it is that you're considering the opinion of, that it should be anything but. Where I would ask people to consider, just think of like the perfect example is how if you think of comedians making jokes, that usually people aren't offended until it's a joke about them. If something is once removed from us by like 1 degree, then we usually don't give a shit about it. But if it hits anywhere near to home for us, then it's deeply, deeply personal. I would also say for these people, we often forget, even as far above us as they might be on whatever social standing, they have people above them, and everyone is almost always, usually their behavior is dictated by whatever their personal needs are. We try and get outside of this, but we have our personal needs, we have our personal pressures, and so almost inevitably, when we look downwards, it's hard not to see numbers because all you're trying to do is nominalize those numbers so the people above you aren't giving you crap all day. And so I couldn't blame somebody in a position above me who looks at me like a number, because that's how they have to look at the things below them to retain some kind of objectivity to what they're doing. I think it's described as compassion fatigue, where if you had to think of every single person and every single impact that you had on their lives going about even the most mundane job, you'd wear yourself out considering all of this. So it's sort of inevitable. But then the way to counteract this is to think less too far above yourself if you're coming over here to teach, and think about the immediate personal impact that you can have and what sort of satisfaction you can derive from that, because I would say that's quite profound. And when there'll be all these opinions, you need only look just a little further out on the internet to find a lot of generic opinions about teachers in Japan, a lot of them being that it's a generic job, you're wasting your career, all these like really, really negative opinions, but they're divorced from the fact that there's so many individual circumstances that somebody might do this in, and individual experiences that somebody might have when they do it. For example, the thing that may get you up in the morning is just this one amazing class that you have, and that's on a personal level where you go in. These kids really like you. Like whenever you're out in the community, they always say hello to you. Or perhaps it's working with someone in your member of staff who, this teacher is killer. They get everything right. And whatever you ask them to do, they totally support you. And you derive satisfaction from that relationship. But very rarely, if at all, in this position, I would say, is anyone looking very far upwards to say, I feel so appreciated, and this job is made worth it by the way that this industry looks at me. I would say that if you look very far above you, that's getting further and further away from you, and so you then wouldn't fault the opinions of people who are very, very critical of you because they see you more and more and more as sort of the faceless, horrible stereotype that they assume you to be, because they get further and further away from the sort of personal experience that is someone living their life. And there's a bunch of different ways then I'd say that's important to consider how you can get this satisfaction, not just in the personal relationships of the students that you might have in your class. Come back. In your classes, not just in the teachers that you're working with on a day-to-day, but then I would say the sort of like personal experiences that arise from being in whatever community. And I know that a lot of people think that if you're in a city that you can't have a more personal connection, but I swear, you actually make any effort in any business that you go into to be something just that much more than a faceless person buying something, and people really appreciate that. You get a lot of satisfaction from it. Another thing I would say is you can actually get away with being very, very satisfied even if your relationships with the students and the staff were not so good, although it would be ideal if it were. But just in the pure quality of the content that you create, how you fulfill your role entirely personally, where when you go in, you could do the sort of generic-y whatever lesson plan is that they want you to do, or you could go a little bit more above and beyond. You could make the most killer PowerPoint in the world for a 3-hint quiz teaching them the vocabulary of who am I, and then they really enjoy it, like a Jeopardy show, and you get so much satisfaction from the fact that you didn't just do the bare minimum, you created an awesome piece of work. Always personal, always individual, always refocusing your efforts on what is it that you can do most immediately for yourself, and avoid the pitfall of considering things too far outside of your orbit. I guess that's the best way to describe it. The further outside your orbit, the more impersonal it becomes, and the more often negative, because nobody knows you. Why would they know you? You're just an English teacher. Why would they care? And no one would fault them for that. But by refocusing our efforts on the individual class, on the individual person, on our individual effort, then you get up in the morning and you give yourself something to do. So it's not that you go, it'd be easy to, for example, to fall into this pit of despair if you got up and you were doing the generic sort of samey lessons that you were like, my lessons are boring. But if you got up and you thought to yourself, I'm gonna make the sweetest lesson today, then you'll have a way better day. And focusing on things that are within your power to change, to actually take hold of and make a difference with. It could never be overstated how useful this is in not falling into that trap of feeling down about your worth, about what you're contributing. You always have control of it in a personal orbit. All right, so I thought that was an interesting topic to discuss, because I know a lot of people they worry about that. They're like, is everybody going to look down on me? How do I fit into the society here? Well, you'll fit in at one level that's probably very cynical, and that's at a very high level. But always on the personal level, you're having so much impact on how that's going to be that it would actually be difficult to say what is the overall impression of people of you without what you are putting into it. The only other thing that I would talk about in terms of where is the satisfaction derived from comes down to length of time doing something, because all of these things have a sort of diminishing return on investment. Anything that we do long enough, if we don't adapt, if we don't increase and evolve our prowess at that thing, then it's easier as well to become embittered or bored with what you're doing. So I would as well advocate for vigilance, that you can't let yourself become stagnant. You can't let yourself get into a rut, because that's the whole point, right? You get into a rut and it's hard to get out of. You've been digging your way in there for so long. So always be thinking as well, how can I increase my satisfaction, as is my responsibility to do so. There's my final thought, is that you can't expect the satisfaction as well to come from a place outside of yourself. Some of that will be there at the beginning, because by virtue of the fact you're in a really interesting place that's really exciting, and kind of the amped up experience you will have for the fact that you're in a new country, having all these new experiences, you get away with a ton of wonderful satisfaction in that period of time. But if you are here for a year, then 2, then 3, and then as long as I've been, then you really do, as I say, need to remain vigilant. Right. I really appreciate you guys watching the videos. That's awesome. If you want a discussional topic, please write me down a question below in the comments. I would appreciate that hugely, because it gives me ideas for the channel. I've been focusing on, I have a marathon tomorrow, and I have a test to study for, so I haven't been able to go out. And so these kind of walk and talk videos, which I know a lot of people like, they're really ideal for the channel right now, that I can still offer something I hope that's interesting, but works with my schedule as well, because I just can't go out as much when I'm studying and training. And this I still get a lot of satisfaction from. So please do like the video if you enjoyed it. Write a comment down below if you'd like a question answered or have some thought on life. If you'd like to support me, there's always my Patreon. I'd really appreciate that. Got tons of things, giveaways and perks there. There's my davetrippinon.com if you want some cool professional photo prints from shots that I've taken around Japan. And I hope to see you in the comments and in the next video. The clock's run out. That's all for now. Peace.